Oftentimes, when you want to do a project for someone else, you submit a pitch, and a pitch is kind of where it's going, what the story is going to look like, who the artist could be, and just kind of a general, here's how we get people excited. In many ways, it's the first draft of kind of marketing flavor text. But one of the things that I've been asking about lately, and it seems to rarely happen, at least not consistently, is the work of who will buy this. And I think that's an important part of a pitch that comics is pretty much missing out on now. Hey everybody, this is Perch. One of the things that happens if you're in product, and that's a big kind of generalized role, but generally, if you go to work for a company and your role is to kind of research new products, sounds like a fun job, get new features, manage a roadmap, any of those kinds of things. One of the qualifications for the job is market research. In other words, what are the competitors? Who would buy this? Who is it aimed at? Generally speaking, how are we going to sell this and who are we going to sell it to? Now, in comics, that would be a pretty valuable thing. And in the past, if you look back at old interviews in the 80s and even some of the 90s, this was something that would happen. You would get a general sense of this comic is a little bit like these titles, so therefore that's our competition, and internal or external. And generally the market's going to be kind of this demographic. This is kind of who we might want to line up as sponsorships. During the very brief period of time when Marvel was flirting with the idea of crossover things like movies and music and books like they did with Dazzler, there was a big emphasis on, who is this for? Where will it go to? Who can we market to? What sponsors can we line up? That kind of stuff, market research. And it was healthy. Now, this is a healthy practice in any business. And again, if you go and you just look at other jobs, other functions, whether it be insurance or tech or anything, this idea of kind of market segmentation, market research is a core part of your job, a core part of a pitch. In comics, however, it's not. In fact, in many cases, the question of who would buy this is left to, well, it's confusing who it's left to. I recently asked, I've asked a couple people, a couple writers and a couple editors, hey, does anybody ever include this in the pitch, like the market that it's going to? And the answer that I've gotten back is not usually. And then two, I asked a writer who said, no, that's the editor's job. I don't do that. When I'm making a pitch, the editor is supposed to do that, figure out where it's supposed to be sold. And I thought that was kind of weird because if you're submitting a pitch to an editor and they're trying to curate a line, why would you submit a pitch kind of with no real understanding who's going to buy it, and then the editor is supposed to find your audience for you, but you're the one writing the pitch? That doesn't make a lot of sense. And I've asked a couple of editors, and one editor said, no, if it's going to come from anywhere, it's going to come from the writer. So I kind of wonder, is this just a case where everybody thinks somebody else is doing the job and nobody's doing the job? Because if you look at some comics that have been put out, not just at the indies, but at Marvel, DC, anywhere, there is a staggering kind of lack of who buys this? Like who is this for? And I think answering that question or having some idea of it could not only lead to better sales, but, maybe prevent some comics that were destined to be immediately canceled from starting in the first place. Or maybe some comics that were on a bad track, getting on the right track by getting it in front of the right audience. It seems like common sense to me, but if for whatever reason, this is missing in comics. Now, if you're an aspiring comic creator, writer, editor, whatever you happen to be, I strongly recommend that you do this. And it can be as simple as just think about your pitch. What's the comic you're writing? Who's it aimed for? Who do you see the target market as? All right, from there, what are the books that are already playing in that market? How much money is being made? Take over a look at Comic-Con. Are the books that are like yours in the top 10, top 50? Nowhere? Where is it coming from? I don't know. Now, to be fair, if you included this information in your pitch to an editor, I don't know if it would help your chances or not, because it feels like the industry is just kind of attuned to not care about this detail. But for yourself, if you're doing your own indie book, if you're doing your own crowdfunding book, whatever it happens to be, kind of having a good sense of who your market is important. And if you have a couple trusted voices who are not your own, ask them. See if they could do some of the work for you. Like, who would buy this? How much money does that group have? You might want to tweak or adjust your script or your book to make it fit a little bit smarter or better in terms of a buying audience. You might consider piggybacking your project on other things that are getting marketing dollars elsewhere. It sounds cheap, and it sounds cold, and it sounds corporate, and it kind of is. But we are trying to make money. So if, for example, you know that Warner Brothers is going to do a huge push around, I don't know, a fighting movie, some kind of punch-em-up action film, and you know your script kind of overlaps some of that, well, you might want to adjust it just slightly so you can pick up on things, so you can deliver a very crisp marketing message of saying, this comic book is like that movie. Even if it isn't completely, it helps. Your goal is to get the biggest audience you can, and the first step is understanding that audience, understanding who's going to buy your book, who might be interested in it, do they have money, do they have interest. I look at a lot of pitches that get done at Marvel and DC, but particularly Marvel, and lately they seem more hopeful than educated. And what I mean by that is it feels like they hope that these titles can launch and go someplace. It feels like ever since Black Panther was a hit, that Marvel has been trying different things, whether it was the World of Wakanda book or the Agents of Wakanda. These books have fans. You know, I'm not saying that nobody is buying these books, but not many people are buying these books. And to me, it feels a little bit kind of like when Marvel was really trying to push the Inhumans. They wanted that market. They hoped that market was there, but it didn't really feel like anybody did the work to determine, is anybody going to show up to buy this? That seems to be the broken part of comics today, finding your audience. And finding your audience can be done very cheaply at the beginning. It's first kind of do some research to see if it's there in the first place. With social media and all the other tools we have at our disposal, it's actually pretty easy to market test concepts. But to be clear, market testing is not gather a bunch of your friends, share it to them in a Facebook group or at a coffee shop, unless you have thousands of friends that are going to pay money. In the weirdest way, that's why some of the crowdfunded stuff is working, because they're market testing a lot of these concepts in those chats that have 1,000 people or more. Now, that's still very small scale from where it needs to go, but that's one reason why projects you wouldn't expect are getting money. There's other reasons too, but it's kind of, to me, embarrassing that some kind of no-name people can go on YouTube, do a live stream, and have a better sense of their audience than the largest comic publisher in existence today. That's broken. I think that I say all this from one step. I mean, a lot of people hear this and they may think, oh, he's dunking on Marvel, or he's, all the rest. No, I actually want these books to sell, both for myself, for others. I actually want these books to be successful. That's my goal. I feel like several books have been okay. If you kind of squint, you can go, okay, I can kind of see where they're going there. But if they would have adjusted this, and this, probably would have had sold double. Probably would have a better chance of succeeding. It's why I often feel that comic books, like when the Avengers comes out and the book barely reflects what's going on in the movie, or doesn't reflect at all. That's the kind of stuff where it feels like, was anybody doing their research? Was anybody kind of thinking about where this pitch would land? Who was going to buy it? Was anybody trying to line it up? I feel like that's one of the most kind of catastrophically missing parts of comics right now. The lack of market research. The lack of knowing who your audience is. The lack of knowing if your book is going to land with a particular audience. Who's going to buy it? Who's going to pay for it? Those are pretty critical things. But it feels like they're afterthoughts, or, maybe nobody cares. I've mentioned this before, but one of the things that's always struck me about Marvel, this is my own personal feeling, nobody else needs to take on this, but they often come across as arrogant to me. And one of the reasons is when you ask these questions, or you kind of probe a little bit, who's this comic aimed for? The response back really comes, oh, we know what we're doing. We know better than you. Don't worry about it. We know. But when you see these titles get canceled over and over and over, you start to think, I don't think they know better than me. I mean, unless the whole strategy was get your book canceled after 2 issues. And that, whose strategy is that? That's a crazy strategy. Anyway, I think just with a very minor amount of effort from someone, the writer, the editor, somebody, comics could have a better landing place when they're made and probably find their audience more successfully. That's what I think anyway. What about you? Leave a comment below if you don't mind. Do you think this matters? Is it something that's missing? How loud are my shoes, by the way? I'm walking on a little trail. Sounds like something got very loud. Anyway, like, subscribe if you don't mind. Follow me on the main pillars of social media, whatever you happen to do. Most importantly, though, thanks for listening.